Emma Brooks stood frozen in the sterile hallway of Mercy General Hospital, her 19-year-old hands trembling as she signed the final papers. Her parents were gone, victims of a rain-slicked highway and a moment of cruel fate. The funeral had been a blur of black umbrellas and whispered condolences. But the aftermath was brutally clear debts, medical bills, and a childhood home that would soon belong to the bank. "You'll live with your aunt and uncle," the lawyer had said, his voice as cold as the documents he slid across his mahogany desk. "The Dawsons have graciously agreed to take you in." Graciously. The word tasted bitter in Emma's mouth as she stood before the imposing iron gates of the Dawson estate 3 days later. Helen Dawson greeted her with a smile that never reached her eyes, while Walter barely acknowledged her presence beyond a curt nod. "You're not here for charity," Helen made clear within the first hour. "You'll earn your keep and follow our rules." For 6 months, Emma lived like a ghost in their grand house. She cleaned, served at dinner parties, and organized files in Walter's study. She learned to be invisible, to anticipate needs before they were spoken, to swallow her grief and loneliness, until they became part of her bones. Then came the night she heard voices drifting from Walter's study. "Richard Hale is willing to pay everything." Walter's voice was urgent, excited. "All our debt's gone. The girl doesn't need to know until it's settled." Emma's blood turned to ice. She pressed herself against the wall, heart hammering as the terrible truth sank in. They were selling her. The next morning, Walter summoned her to his study. Helen stood by the window like a sentinel, her face carved from marble. "You're to be married," Walter announced without preamble, "to Mr. Richard Hale, a man of considerable means, who has agreed to resolve our financial difficulties in exchange for your hand." "But I don't know him," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible. "He's 49, successful, and interested in giving you a future," Helen said flatly. "This isn't a discussion, Emma. It's already decided." That night, Emma stared at her reflection in the ornate bedroom mirror. The girl looking back was pale, hollow-eyed, a stranger molded by grief and forced obedience. But somewhere deep inside, a quiet voice whispered, "This cannot be the end of my story." 2 weeks later, she sat in an exclusive hotel lounge, wearing a cream-colored dress Helen had chosen. When Richard Hale entered, Emma's breath caught. He was tall, imposing, with silver-streaked dark hair and eyes like storm clouds. Power radiated from him like heat from a fire. "Emma," he said simply, extending his hand. "It's good to finally meet you." When the adults excused themselves, leaving them alone, Richard studied her with unsettling intensity. "You're frightened," he observed quietly. Emma nodded, unable to lie. "I don't blame you. This arrangement wasn't your choice." He leaned back slightly. "You remind me of someone I failed to protect once. It's a long time ago." "Then why agree to this?" She found the courage to ask. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "'Cause sometimes we get second chances to do what's right." So the wedding was set for the following weekend. There would be no time for hesitation, no opportunity for escape. As Emma stood in the garden that final night before becoming Mrs. Hale, she whispered a desperate prayer into the darkness. "Please give me strength for whatever comes next." The ceremony passed in a haze of ivory silk and camera flashes. Emma moved through her wedding day like a sleepwalker, beautiful and distant in her designer gown. The chapel Richard had reserved was opulent but cold, filled with his business associates and powerful strangers. Not a single person there belonged to her old life. At the altar, Richard's hand was steady as he slipped the platinum band onto her finger. When their eyes met during the vows, something unreadable flickered in his gaze. Not desire, not possession, but something quieter, something that might have been regret. The reception blurred past in a symphony of clinking glasses and polite applause. Emma barely touched her food, her stomach twisted in knots as the evening wore on. Every congratulation felt like a nail in a coffin, every toast like a countdown to the inevitable. When Richard finally appeared at her side and murmured, "It's time to go," her knees nearly gave out. The ride to his estate was silent, except for the soft purr of the engine. Emma pressed herself against the passenger door, watching the city lights blur past, her heart racing with each mile that carried her further from everything familiar. Richard's mansion rose from manicured grounds like something from a fairy tale, all stone and soaring windows. But fairy tales, Emma reminded herself, weren't always kind to their heroines. He led her through marble corridors lined with priceless art, past rooms that spoke of wealth accumulated over generations. Finally, they stopped before an ornate door at the end of a long hallway. "This is your room," Richard said quietly. Emma blinked in confusion. "My room?" He pushed open the door to reveal a stunning bedroom suite decorated in soft blues and cream-fresh flowers filled crystal vases, and moonlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows. It was beautiful, elegant, and completely separate from wherever he slept. "I told you nothing would happen that you didn't want," Richard said, noticing her bewilderment. "I meant it." "But we're married," Emma said, her voice small. "Marriage is a legal contract, Emma. Intimacy is a choice." He stepped back into the hallway. "There are clothes in the wardrobe, books in the sitting area. Anything you need, just ask the staff." He turned to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry for all of it. You deserved better than this." The door clicked shut, leaving Emma alone in her gilded cage. She sank onto the edge of the massive bed, still in her wedding gown, and for the first time in months, allowed herself to cry. It's not from fear, but from confusion. Nothing about this night had gone as she'd expected. Outside her window, she could see light spilling from another wing of the house. Richard's room, perhaps? She wondered what he was thinking, why he had married her only to leave her untouched, and what kind of man paid a fortune for a bride he didn't intend to claim. As she finally changed out of her wedding dress and into the silk nightgown that had been left for her, Emma realized something had shifted. The terror that had gripped her for weeks was ebbing, replaced by something far more dangerous: curiosity. Who was Richard Hale, really? And what did he truly want from her? The days that followed settled into an unexpected rhythm. Emma woke each morning to breakfast served on fine china, with the housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, offering warm smiles and gentle conversation. The mansion, which had seemed so imposing that first night, revealed itself to be filled with light and beauty during daylight hours. Richard left early for work and returned late, their interactions limited to polite greetings in passing. He was courteous, but distant, treating her more like a house guest than a wife. Emma found herself with unprecedented freedom to explore the vast library, walk the gardens, or simply exist without the crushing weight of expectations she'd carried. At the Dawsons, but it was the small gestures that began to chip away at her wariness. Fresh flowers appeared in her room daily, always varieties she'd admired during her garden walks. Books on subjects she'd mentioned appeared on her bedside table. When she caught a cold after walking in the rain, she found homemade soup and medicine. Waiting for her, along with a note in Richard's precise handwriting, "Feel better soon." 3 weeks into their strange marriage, Emma ventured into the kitchen late one evening, seeking tea for her restless thoughts. She found Richard there instead, sitting at the small breakfast table with a cup of coffee and a stack of papers. His tie loosened and his usually perfect hair slightly mussed. He looked up, startled. "I'm sorry, I didn't think anyone would be." "Up. I couldn't sleep," Emma admitted, suddenly self-conscious in her robe and bare feet. "Would you like some tea? I can make it." The offer surprised her. "You don't have to do that." But he was already moving to the stove, his movements practiced and efficient. As the kettle heated, they stood in comfortable silence. It struck Emma how different he seemed here, away from his formal business persona. Younger somehow, despite the silver in his hair. "Can I ask you something?" she said impulsively. Richard nodded, preparing her tea with careful attention. "Why did you really marry me? And please don't say it was to help me. No one spends that kind of money out of pure altruism." He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I had a sister once, Sarah. She was about your age when our father arranged her marriage to a man twice her age. A business associate who needed our family's connections." He handed Emma her tea, their fingers brushing briefly. "Was away at university. Should have stopped it. Should have brought her with me, but I was young and selfish and thought she'd be fine." Emma's heart clenched at the pain in his voice. "She wasn't fine," Richard continued. He was cruel to her, controlling. When she finally found the courage to leave him, he made sure she couldn't access any money, couldn't go anywhere. He stopped, jaw working silently. What happened to her? Emma asked softly. She took her own life rather than go back to him. Richard's hands clenched around his coffee mug. I've carried that guilt for 25 years, when your uncle approached me about the arrangement, when I saw you sitting there so young and frightened. I saw Sarah. I couldn't save her, but maybe I could give you the choice she never had. Emma set down her tea with shaking hands. I'm not your sister, Richard. No, he agreed, looking at her with those storm gray eyes. You're not? But you deserved better than being sold to the highest bidder. Even if that bidder happened to be me. They talked until dawn, sharing stories about lost families and childhood dreams. Emma learned that Richard had been building companies since he was 25, that he read voraciously, that he'd traveled to 6 continents, but had never felt at home anywhere. No. In return, she told him about her parents' Sunday pancake breakfasts, her dream of becoming a teacher, the way her mother used to sing while doing dishes, as the first rays of sunlight crept through the kitchen windows. Emma realized something fundamental had shifted between them. The stranger who had married her was becoming a person, complex and wounded and unexpectedly kind. Emma, Richard said as they finally prepared to part ways for what was left of the night. Would you like to have dinner with me tomorrow? Actually, together at this time, not just in the same house. For the first time since her parents' death, Emma smiled without forcing it. I'd like that. The dinner led to another, then walks in the garden, then quiet evenings reading together in the library. Over the following months, Emma discovered layers to Richard she'd never imagined. He was brilliant in business, but surprisingly gentle with the estate's animals. He could discuss philosophy and literature with equal passion, and he listened to her opinions with genuine interest, something no one had done since her parents died. The physical distance between them remained, though Emma found herself increasingly aware of his presence, the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed at something she said, how his hand lingered when he helped her into the car, the careful space he maintained between them on the sofa, as if he were fighting his own desires. 5 months into their marriage, Emma found herself in Dr. Morrison's office, staring at test results that changed everything. Congratulations, Mrs. Hale. You're about 8 weeks pregnant. The words hit her like a physical blow. Pregnant, but they had never. She thought back to that night 6 weeks ago, when she'd found Richard in his study, overwhelmed by a particularly brutal business deal. She'd offered comfort, and comfort had become tenderness, and tenderness had become a night of unexpected passion. Their first and only time together, born of genuine feeling rather than obligation. The next morning, Richard had been mortified by his lack of control, convinced he'd taken advantage of her vulnerability. Despite Emma's reassurances that she'd wanted it, he'd retreated behind walls of guilty distance that she hadn't been able to breach since. Now, driving home with the ultrasound image in her purse, Emma didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She'd finally felt close to Richard, finally believed they might build something real together, and now this. A pregnancy that would complicate everything. She found Richard in his study that evening, bent over contracts. The lamplight caught the silver in his hair. Her heart ached with how much she'd come to love this complicated, honorable man. Richard, we need to talk. He looked up, and she saw his walls immediately slam into place. Since their night together, he'd been unfailingly polite but distant, as if he were punishing himself for a crime she'd never accused him of committing. Emma sat across from his desk, her hands folded to hide their trembling. I'm pregnant. The pen slipped from Richard's fingers. His face went absolutely white. He stood abruptly, then sat back down, running his hands through his hair. I am so sorry. I never meant for this to happen. That night I lost control, and now you're paying the price for my selfishness. Stop, Emma said firmly. Just stop. That night wasn't about you losing control or taking advantage. It was about 2 people who care for each other finally admitting it. Richard's eyes snapped to hers. You were emotional, vulnerable. I was a grown woman making a choice, Emma interrupted. The same choice I'd make again if you'd stop treating me like I'm made of glass. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken truths. I love you, Emma said quietly. I know that wasn't part of your plan when you married me out of guilt and good intentions. But I love your kindness, your intelligence, the way you've given me space to heal and grow. I love how you remember that I prefer tea to coffee and that you always ask about the books I'm reading. Richard stood slowly, moving around the desk until he was close enough to touch her. His hand hovered near her face before finally, gently cupping her cheek. You couldn't possibly love me, he whispered. I'm 29 years older than you. I married you under false pretenses. I've done nothing but complicate your life. Emma leaned into his touch. You've given me my life back. You've shown me what respect looks like, what partnership could be. You've made me feel valued and heard and safe. She placed her hand over his. I know this pregnancy isn't what either of us planned, but Richard, I want this baby, our baby. And I want to build a real marriage with you, if you'll let me. For a long moment, Richard searched her face as if looking for any sign of doubt or coercion. When he finally kissed her, it was with the desperate relief of a man who'd been holding his breath for months. I love you too, he whispered against her lips. God help me, I think I started falling the moment I saw you in that hotel lounge, trying so hard to be brave. That night, Richard didn't retreat to his separate wing of the house. Instead, he held Emma close as they made plans for their future together, for the family they would become. As she drifted off to sleep in his arms, Emma marveled at how love had grown in the most unlikely soil, taking root in an arrangement that should have been nothing more than a business transaction. The scared 19-year-old girl who'd been sold into marriage was gone. In her place was a woman who'd chosen love, chosen hope, chosen to believe that sometimes the most unexpected beginnings could lead to the most beautiful endings. 2 years later, Emma stood in the nursery doorway, watching Richard read to their 18-month-old daughter, Lily. The little girl sat on her father's lap, her dark hair curling like his, her gray eyes bright with curiosity as he showed her pictures in a storybook about brave princesses who saved themselves. And they lived happily ever after, Richard concluded, pressing a kiss to the top of Lily's head. Again, Daddy, Lily demanded, clapping her small hands together. Emma smiled, remembering how terrified Richard had been during her pregnancy. Convinced he was too old to be a good father, now watching him patiently restart the story for the third time, she knew how wrong he'd been. Age had given him patience, wisdom, and a fierce protective love that surrounded their daughter like armor. The past 2 years hadn't been without challenges. They'd had to learn how to be married for real, how to navigate disagreements, and merge 2 very different lives. Emma had enrolled in online college courses to pursue her teaching degree, while Richard had gradually stepped back from the most demanding aspects of his business to spend more time with his family. There had been difficult conversations too, confrontation with the Dawsons, where Richard had made it clear that Emma owed them nothing and that any future contact would be on her terms alone. The decision to start a foundation in memory of Richard's sister, providing support and legal aid to young women in forced marriages or abusive situations. Mama, Lily spotted Emma in the doorway and scrambled down from Richard's lap, toddling over on unsteady legs. Emma scooped her daughter up, marveling as she did every day at this miracle of a child who'd brought so much joy into their lives. Did Daddy tell you a good story? Princess story, Lily announced proudly. What did you learn about princesses? Emma asked, settling beside Richard on the reading chair. They're brave, Lily said, then leaned against Emma's shoulder with the sudden sleepiness of toddlers everywhere. As Richard took their drowsy daughter to put her down for her nap, Emma walked to the nursery window overlooking the gardens. The roses were in full bloom, and she could see the new playground Richard had built near the old oak tree. This house that had once felt like a beautiful prison had become a true home. Her phone buzzed with a text from her study group at the local college where she'd recently started taking in-person classes. At 22, she was older than most of her classmates. But she'd discovered she loved learning again, loved the discussions and challenges of pursuing her dreams. She's out like a light, Richard said softly, joining Emma at the window and slipping his arms around her from behind. Emma leaned back against his chest, still amazed sometimes by how perfectly she fit against him. Hard to believe she'll be. To next month. Hard to believe you'll be graduating next spring, Richard murmured into her hair. My wife, the teacher. I'm so proud of you, Emma. She turned in his arms, studying the face that had once seemed so intimidating. Lines of laughter now creased the corners of his eyes, put there by years of genuine happiness. The distance and guilt that had once shadowed his features were gone, replaced by the contentment of a man who'd found his place in the world. Do you ever regret it? Emma asked. Marrying someone so young? Taking on all the complications that came with me? Richard's hands framed her face with infinite gentleness. Never. Not for a single day. You gave me everything I didn't know I was missing. A real marriage, a daughter who thinks I hung the moon, a purpose beyond just making money. He kissed her softly. You saved me as much as I'd hoped to save you. That evening, after Lily was asleep and they'd shared dinner on the terrace under a canopy of stars, Emma curled up beside Richard on their bed. In a few weeks, they'd celebrate their 3rd wedding anniversary. She thought about the terrified girl who'd stood in that hotel lounge, certain her life was over before it had truly begun. She'd been so wrong. Her life hadn't ended with that arranged marriage. It had begun, not in the way she'd expected, not in the timeline she would have chosen, but beautifully nonetheless. She'd learned that love could grow from the most unlikely. Seeds that respect and kindness could build a stronger foundation than passion alone. That sometimes what looked like an ending was actually a doorway to something better. What are you thinking about? Richard asked, stroking her hair as she lay with her head on his chest. Happy endings, Emma said simply. And how they don't always look like what we expect. No, Richard agreed, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Sometimes they're even better. Outside their window, the night bloomed with promise. And inside their home, love continued to grow in all the ways that mattered most. Emma had been sold into marriage at 19, but she'd chosen. Love built a family and created a future that belonged entirely to her. And if that wasn't a happy ending worth fighting for, she didn't know what was. Asterisk the Eon did like this video. If the story touched your heart, subscribe for more emotional tales, and share with someone who believes in the power of true love. And let us know in the comments. We love connecting with our global community of romance lovers.